I spent 37 years raising my son alone, and the day he asked me to sign over my house, I knew something inside him had already died. This is a story about what happens when the child you sacrificed everything for becomes someone you no longer recognize, and how sometimes the only way to save yourself is to let them believe they've won. My name is Margaret, and I became a widow when Daniel was only 6 years old. His father died in a workplace accident, and the settlement money was barely enough to cover the funeral and a few months of bills. I worked 2 jobs for years just to keep our small house and put food on the table. I was a cashier during the day and cleaned offices at night. Daniel never went without new school supplies or birthday presents, even when I wore the same 3 outfits for 2 years straight. I told myself it was worth it, because I was building a future for him. He was a smart boy, and he got into a good college on a partial scholarship. I took out loans to cover the rest, and worked extra shifts to send him spending money. He called me every Sunday during his first year, and told me about his classes and his new friends. By his second year, the calls became less frequent. By his 3rd year, he only called when he needed something. I told myself he was just busy, and that this was normal for young people finding their independence. He graduated with honors and got a job at a marketing firm in the city 3 hours away. I was so proud of him at his graduation ceremony, even though I was the only family member there in a sea of parents and siblings and grandparents. He moved into an apartment with 2 roommates, and I helped him move his boxes up 4 flights of stairs despite my bad knee. He promised to visit often, but months would go by between his trips home. Then he met Caroline. She was from a wealthy family and worked at the same firm in a different department. Daniel brought her home for Christmas after they had been dating for 8 months, and I could tell right away that she looked at our small house with barely concealed disappointment. She smiled politely when I served dinner on my old mismatched plates, but I saw her exchange a glance with Daniel. That glance said everything. After dinner, Daniel pulled me aside and asked if I had thought about downsizing. He said the house was too much for me to maintain alone, and that I should consider selling it and moving into a senior apartment. I was 59 years old and in perfect health aside from my knee. I told him I loved this house and had no intention of leaving. He dropped the subject, but I could see the frustration in his eyes. 6 months later, he called to tell me he and Caroline were engaged. I cried happy tears over the phone and asked when I could help with the wedding planning. He said Caroline's mother was handling everything, and that they wanted to keep it small and simple. The wedding was anything but small and simple. It was held at an expensive vineyard 2 hours away with over 200 guests. I offered to contribute what I could, but Daniel told me not to worry about it, and that Caroline's parents were covering the costs. I spent $300 I didn't have on a mother of the groom dress because I wanted to look presentable. When I arrived at the venue the day of the wedding, I was handed a seating chart. My name was at table 18 in the very back corner near the kitchen doors. I was seated with Caroline's distant cousins, who didn't speak to me once during the entire reception. Daniel and Caroline greeted every table during dinner, except they somehow ran out of time before reaching mine. I watched my son laugh and dance and give a toast thanking Caroline's parents for their generosity and love. He never mentioned me. Not once. I left before the cake was cut because I couldn't bear to sit there anymore feeling invisible. Daniel didn't call to ask where I had gone. After the wedding, they moved into a beautiful new house in an upscale neighborhood. Caroline was pregnant within the year, and they had a baby girl named Sophie. I drove 3 hours to meet my granddaughter in the hospital and brought a handmade quilt I had spent weeks sewing. Caroline thanked me, but I never saw Sophie wrapped in that quilt during any of my visits. I offered to help with babysitting, but Caroline said they had hired a professional nanny. I sent birthday cards with checks inside for Sophie, even though money was tight after I had finally paid off Daniel's college loans. The cards were never acknowledged. I stopped receiving invitations to family gatherings, and only found out about Sophie's second birthday party through a photo Daniel posted online. I called him and asked why I hadn't been invited. He sighed and said it had been an oversight and that things had been hectic. I knew it wasn't an oversight. Then one Saturday afternoon, Daniel showed up at my house unannounced with Caroline. They sat down at my kitchen table, and Daniel said they needed to talk to me about something important. He said they were concerned about me living alone and managing the house. He said property values in my neighborhood had gone up significantly, and that I was sitting on a valuable asset. Caroline chimed in and said it would be smart financial planning to sell now while the market was good. I asked them why they were suddenly so interested in my house. Daniel looked uncomfortable, but Caroline didn't hesitate. She said they were looking to upgrade to a bigger home because they were planning for a second child. She said their current house didn't have enough space and that they had found the perfect property but needed a larger down payment. My stomach dropped as I realized what they were actually asking. Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. He said I could sign the house over to him, and he would sell it and invest the money for my future. He said I could move into a nice assisted living community where I wouldn't have to worry about maintenance or bills. He said this would be better for everyone. I pulled my hand away and asked him if he was seriously asking me to give up my home so he could buy a bigger house. He got defensive and said he wasn't asking me to give it up, but to be smart about my future. Caroline added that they would make sure I was taken care of, and that this was really about my well-being. I told them I needed time to think about it. They left looking frustrated, and I sat alone in my kitchen, feeling like I didn't recognize my own son anymore. Over the next few weeks, Daniel called me repeatedly. Each conversation became more insistent. He said I was being stubborn and unreasonable. He said I wasn't getting any younger, and that I should think about what would happen if I got sick or injured. He said he was only trying to help me. I started having trouble sleeping because the pressure was constant. Then Caroline called me directly. She said they had already made an offer on the new house contingent on securing additional funds. She said if I didn't help them, they would lose the opportunity of a lifetime. She said I should think about Sophie and the new baby, and what kind of grandmother would stand in the way of her grandchildren having a good home. That phone call made something inside me snap into clarity. I realized that I had spent my entire adult life sacrificing for Daniel, and he had grown into someone who only saw me as an asset to be managed. I decided I needed to know exactly how much my son valued me beyond what I could give him. I called Daniel and told him I had made a decision. He sounded excited and relieved. I said I would sign over the house, but I needed a few weeks to sort through my belongings and make arrangements. He said that was fine and that he would start the paperwork, but I had no intention of signing anything. Instead, I contacted a lawyer and had a will drafted leaving everything to a charity that helped single mothers. I opened a separate bank account and transferred my savings where Daniel couldn't access it. I documented every conversation and every text message where he had pressured me. Then I did something I never thought I would do. I called Caroline's parents. I had met them briefly at the wedding and they had seemed like decent people. I invited them for coffee, and they accepted, though they seemed surprised by the invitation. We met at a cafe halfway between our homes, and I told them everything. I showed them the text messages and explained how Daniel and Caroline had been pressuring me to sign over my house. Caroline's father's face went dark with anger. He said he had no idea this was happening, and that they had given Daniel and Caroline a substantial amount of money as a wedding gift, specifically so they wouldn't have financial stress. Caroline's mother looked genuinely distressed. She asked what I needed, and I told her I didn't need anything except for them to know the truth. 2 days later, Caroline's father called Daniel. I wasn't on that call, but Daniel called me immediately afterward, and he was furious. He accused me of going behind his back and trying to sabotage his relationship with his in-laws. He said I had embarrassed him and made him look like a greedy monster. He said Caroline's parents were now questioning their financial decisions, and had implied they might reduce the inheritance they had planned for Caroline. I stayed calm and told him that I had simply told the truth. He said I was vindictive and cruel, and that I was ruining his life. I asked him if he had ever considered that he was ruining mine. He hung up on me. I didn't hear from him for 3 months. During that time, I learned through a mutual acquaintance that Daniel and Caroline had not bought the new house. I also learned that Caroline's parents had indeed pulled back on their financial support, pending some serious conversations about values and entitlement. I felt no satisfaction from this news, only a deep sadness. Then on a Tuesday afternoon, Daniel showed up at my door. He looked tired and older somehow. I let him in and made tea, and we sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he spoke. He said he had been doing a lot of thinking. He said Caroline's parents had confronted them about their treatment of me, and it had sparked terrible fights between him and Caroline. He said therapy had been mentioned and hard questions had been asked. He said he didn't know when he had become the kind of person who would ask his widowed mother to give up her home. His voice cracked when he said that. I wanted to reach out and comfort him the way I had when he was a child, but I kept my hands wrapped around my teacup. He said he was sorry. He said it over and over. He said he had gotten caught up in keeping up with Caroline's lifestyle and had lost sight of what mattered. He said he had treated me like an obligation instead of a person. I listened, and when he finished, I told him that I appreciated his apology, but that trust wasn't rebuilt with words. He nodded and said he understood. He asked if there was any way he could make things right. I told him that I didn't want his money or his grand gestures. I told him I wanted consistency and respect, and to be treated like I mattered. He promised he would try. Over the following year, Daniel did try. He called every week without fail. He visited once a month and brought Sophie, who was now old enough to enjoy spending time with me. He never once mentioned my house or my finances. Caroline remained distant but polite, and I accepted that our relationship would never be warm. I was okay with that. On my 62nd birthday, Daniel showed up with Sophie and a photo album he had made. It was filled with pictures from his childhood and notes he had written about specific memories. One note said he remembered how I had worked the night shift and still made it to every single one of his school plays. Another said he remembered the year I couldn't afford a real Christmas tree, so we decorated a large houseplant, and he had thought it was the most creative thing ever. I cried reading those notes because it meant he had remembered. It meant that somewhere beneath the entitled man he had become, there was still the boy I had raised. I never did sign over my house. I still live here surrounded by memories and hard-won independence. Daniel and Caroline eventually bought a different house that was smaller and more reasonable, and I heard through Sophie that they seem happier now. Sophie spends one weekend a month with me, and we bake cookies and work in the garden. She tells me things she doesn't tell her parents, and I listen the way I once listened to Daniel. I have updated my will, and Daniel is back in it, but with conditions managed through the lawyer. He will inherit the house, but only after I am gone, and only if he has maintained consistent, respectful contact with me. The lawyer will verify this through documented visits and communication. It isn't about punishment. It is about ensuring that he values the relationship and not just the inheritance. Some people might think I am being cruel or manipulative, but I know what it feels like to be valued only for what you can provide. I know what it feels like to be erased and dismissed by the person you loved most in the world. I spent decades giving everything I had to my son. Now in these final years, I am giving something to myself. Dignity, boundaries, the knowledge that I will not be taken advantage of ever again. Daniel seems to understand this now, even if it took him too long to get there. Last week he called and asked if he could bring Caroline and Sophie for Sunday dinner. I said yes. They arrived and Caroline brought flowers. We ate together at my small table with the mismatched plates, and nobody said anything about the house being too much for me or suggested I move. After dinner, Daniel helped me wash dishes while Caroline and Sophie played in the yard. He told me he was grateful I hadn't given up on him completely. I told him I never could, but I also told him that love doesn't mean accepting disrespect. He nodded and said he was teaching Sophie that lesson too. I looked out the window at my granddaughter running through the grass, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not hope that everything would be perfect, because life is never perfect, but hope that the worst was behind us, and that what remained could be built on honesty instead of obligation. I am 67 years old, and I live alone in the house I fought to keep. Some nights I still work my budget carefully and worry about unexpected expenses. But I am not afraid anymore. I know my worth, and I will never forget it again.